rendering, but you can't really take advantage of those things if you're beholden to a certain user interface for content authoring. So that can be limiting. And yeah, like on Facebook, for example, if you want to post there, you are also implicitly transferring the rights to your content creation to be shared with them for better or worse. So these are some downsides to this blocking problem. So I mentioned that ActivityPub makes use of this activity streams vocabulary. What is it doing? It's basically a social data syntax, really it's a social data vocabulary that's manifested into JSON, but could easily be turned into XML or like Turtle or whatever you want to do for linked data. So how should we normalize all these different kinds of social data on the web? Activity streams can help. JSON-LD, what if we need to add extra fields to that vocabulary for certain business cases? JSON-LD helps you extend JSON with linked data. And so yeah, this is going to talk about how ActivityPub works, and I'm totally ripping off all the images and stuff from section 1 of the spec, which means you can go review this just by reading section 1 of the spec, and it's not too scary. So meet Alyssa. This is our an actor. So in ActivityPub, there's this notion of different actors on the social web. Usually that's a person, or we can think about that as one. But that could also be like a machine actor, a chatbot, or an agent, or something acting on your behalf. And this is a JSON file, as you can see. In JSON-LD, you would say that there's what is the context of this document. You might have noticed that in Kim's presentation, there was different kind of context or namespaces for BTCR as well as DIDs and probably multiple vocabularies there. So this sets the scope for what type means in this context, or what followers means in this context. So that's kind of how we get the data. And yeah, you can kind of read that for yourself. So what does Alyssa have? ActivityPub sort of works kind of like email. And every actor has a pointer to an inbox and an outbox. Let's go back for a sec. You can see inbox, outbox, and it's pointing to different URLs. Those could be on different domains if you want. It's all the web, so you can be pretty flexible with it. An inbox is where you receive notifications and updates from the rest of the federated social web, and the outbox is where you put things to put out there. So this is kind of what this is saying. You can see here it says like post and get as these arrows. Those are HTTP methods. So this could be generalized to other transport mechanisms, but this is very like web native, speaking the same protocol that your web browser makes when it talks to the website. So let's say Alyssa wants to publish a note. In the activity streams vocabulary, we can talk about what a note is. We can talk about who it's addressed to and who shouldn't see it and who should. And we can talk about what its content is. So if she wants to send that out or publish it like on her blog, she would post this into her outbox of the ActivityPub server. The ActivityPub server, if it gets like a raw object like a note, it tries to wrap it in some like an activity. So usually a given object has like a life cycle of activities, sort of like a DID document would. And so it wraps it in this activity that says, Kim created that note, kind of wraps it. And the actor of that activity was Alyssa. There's other activity objects like delete, all the CRUD operations, as well as other activities like travel and stuff. I think Cook isn't one to be good. So that goes into her outbox, which is a collection, and that has items, and now it's in there. And so if she ever wanted to like render a blog from her outbox, she wouldn't have to use like a different database or something. She could kind of flip this up as JSON and render it however she wanted. I am Ben, but I'm not this Ben. But Ben is one of her friends that might want to like find out about what she's posting. So, and also in this post that she made, she said actually like, I want Ben to find out about this. I'm talking to him, and she's actually asking him a question. So because that URL was there, her ActivityPub server is supposed to look at who it's addressed to, which is a URL. Go interrogate that URL and say, what's his inbox? And then basically send an HTTP post request to Ben's inbox so he can have a copy too. Like completely different installation, database of his choice, all that stuff. So it goes over there. And then Ben responds. He makes a create activity or a note that is in reply to the one that Alyssa sent and has, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot the step, yada yada. Alyssa's happy she can like this, so we're kind of getting the full social web vocabulary down. And I think that's like another response. So you can sort of see the back and forth here and how the social data vocabulary of activity streams facilitates the modeling of the social web. And then the ActivityPub protocol says, depending on the activity type, you should really have certain side effects. So if we saw the create activity, if it's an update activity, the server should kind of look it up by ID and update certain fields. If there's delete, if you get a follow activity, then the ActivityPub server may or should maintain like a collection of followers and people following you on the server, likes, and undo, etc. So you can start to see how like activities can really model the life cycle of objects on the social web, and an ActivityPub server can be aware of specific activities and store data in certain ways so that you can retrieve it in a very traditional Twitter or Facebook-like way. Great. Dispin is the implementation I made that was the first one, and it's kind of like it stands for distributed pastebin. If any of you have used GitHub Gist or pastebin, it's an anonymous place you can go leave a text string and it's ActivityPub aware. So it's really simple. It's not worth demoing. Mastodon is really interesting, and this is what Marcus was referring to. So Mastodon is an independent project. It existed before ActivityPub, but it was striving to be a Twitter-like experience that was federated in nature. And the developer, who I only know as Nightfall from GitHub, found out about our effort and was like, "This is great. I need something like this. I want a JSON-based federated social networking protocol." And this was the first and flagship sort of implementation. So I'm self-hosting this. That's my jam. And so I will pull this up. Monitors and stuff. So this is what it looks like. Like I said, it looks kind of like TweetDeck. I'm going to ignore that. This is like my feed of people I'm following, a lot of which are on a different server. They're not all on my Mastodon installation. I'm like the only person there. But what's cool is, I can follow people on many different servers. And this is Chris Weber, who was the main editor of the ActivityPub spec. And I posted something on Twitter because I'm still like largely posting there for the network effects. And he quoted me over on the main Mastodon installation, which is at mastodon.social. And I was like, that's great. And so I could discover this in my feed, and then I see a star button. We all know kind of what to do there, even though it's not labeled. And when I hit the star button here, it basically created a like activity like we sort of saw and federated it back to his server. I believe this goes to. Yeah, now we're on mastodon.social or octodon.social, so that's actually a different one. And when I liked it over there, this counter immediately goes up. So you can kind of see how we're doing very traditional social web type activities, and we're all on our own servers, but we still have the benefits of like being notified when we're interacting with each other. It's really cool. Okay, so now go back to the slides. Seems like good. There you go. So if you want to learn about ActivityPub, or honestly just get started using it through Mastodon, you don't really have to understand the protocol. That's what's so awesome about this. And the most popular installation that is operated by the main developers, I believe, so you can support them by joining there, is at mastodon.social. ActivityPub.com is doing ION, but I redirect to the protocol, so if you want to learn about it there, that's a good URL to type in and memorize. That was ActivityPub. Now I'm going to move on to Solid real fast. Solid is a related effort. It stands for Social Linked Data, Solid. And what I think is interesting about it is it has a very great evangelist, Tim Berners-Lee, who famously worked at CERN and created the World Wide Web in 1990 or so, or first published about that, September 1990. So he's been working on that in his decentralized information group at MIT for 3 or 4 years at this point. So derived from social linked data. It's a modular and extensible protocol. This was, interestingly, not a part of a working group at the W3C. It's part of a community group, which means it just had different constraints and possibilities in terms of like the politics of making it, and they could really focus on like a specific vision and make it without a consensus building process, for better or worse. These are the URLs you might want to know about. The project page on MIT, the Solid spec, so it's a specification, and there's also a Node.js server implementation that's the kind of canonical implementation, where the data will just be stored as files in your file system, which is kind of cool. Kind of like an Apache web server. Just put HTML files in a directory and serve them to the web. With Node Solid Server, you can put some JSON files in a directory, and then it gets presented to the web as URLs. So it has different components that are all like sub-specifications. For authentication, it uses this thing called WebID. It's pretty simple. It just means basically the identifiers instead of DIDs are usually HTTP URLs. actually I think they're any URLs, and DIDs schemes are also URLs. So you can start to see how, even though I'm talking a lot about traditional HTTP and HTTPS, one of the cool things about the DID specification is it bridges all these like blockchainy things with the URL syntax that many developers already know and many libraries already know. So WebID theoretically could scale there. They realized pretty early on that a lot of enterprises might want to use OpenID Connect to authenticate, so they have this like WebID OIDC thing. For collections and collections of objects to actually store this stuff and model what we're storing, there's this notion of like data containers, sort of like activity streams collections, and they're building on an older protocol called the Linked Data Platform. It's pretty cool. And authorization is something they really focused on hard. How do we write access control lists for objects in our personal data stores? And they call that web access control. So, whereas everything in activity streams is like JSON, everything's kind of self-contained regardless of how you're getting it, via HTTP or something else. Everything here is like way more RESty and kind of like maybe more tightly coupled with HTTP. So if I want to ask, like, there's some URL, some content that's data, I can send an HTTP head request and say, tell me about that, and then there's URL links to the access control list and this meta document that describes it. This is, Tim really likes to use Turtle. I think that's what this is. And so but this could very easily be transformed back to JSON LD somewhat trivially. So this describes that on a certain URL that an individual should be able to read, write, and I guess control it. I don't know what that means. And also you can delegate authority to groups. They kind of modeled it off of like Unix and POSIX file system ACLs, but again, because it's linked data, it's very easy to extend and make like semantically specific permissions you might want to grant. I was reviewing the spec this morning and I realized like they actually did something interesting, which was I think they focused a lot on authorization, authentication, and putting these things together. And everything that was like things activity streams, ActivityPub already did, they kind of just said, hey, we're going to get to that when we get to that. And I think actually the protocols can work quite complementary. But you can see here when like we're talking about friends lists, they're like, we're going to work on that later. And then I think they ran out of funding, so they probably never will. But they use linked data notifications just like ActivityPub does. And there you go. This is, I think, an interesting concept in the context of like personal data stores. There's this notion of like type registry. So let's say I'm using an application to store recipes, and it wants to like store data in my data server or in my solid server. You can say that application can look up and say, where do you want to store certain types of data? Where should I put recipes, or where should I read recipes from? So the application that is doing things with recipes doesn't also need to know how to store them. And also you can change and move and point to like exactly where you want to store different types of objects. And for any entrepreneurs in the room, there could be like specific data stores for certain types of objects, and users can kind of compose them together, which is kind of an interesting opportunity. They were motivated by the social web working group user stories, like posting a note. So the same user story we saw from ActivityPub, we can kind of walk through in a solid context. And again, we're using Turtle, I don't know why. But you should send this HTTP request and say, I want to create a new object in this notes collection. And this is using the activity streams like data vocabulary that adds Turtle to describe a note, just like we were saying from Melissa earlier. It's suggesting a certain slug or like URL slug it should get. Later, you can update it by doing traditional like REST type things. I'm going to put an update to this same URL. Or you can patch it to change just certain things about the URL without putting a whole new version of it. In this case, they're using Sparkle to do that. So again, very kind of linked data native. Later, he realized he doesn't want it. You can send an HTTP delete request to the same URL. It's deleted. And yeah, I noticed today on the website they're talking about 2 new startups that are trying to, I guess, turn Solid into a business. Dimitri has gone to work at this one called Entropy. And Inrupt is the only one actually mentioned on the website, but I didn't link to that URL because if you go there, it doesn't load. So I don't know what it's about. But Entropy looks cool. They have a white paper you can read. And then they have also posted these updates about what to expect over the next couple months. So I guess they're trying to port all of their demo infrastructure to this URL where anyone will eventually be able to sign up and have a solid store. It's like really basic. I don't think it really works right now, which is totally fine. I'm going to do that. And then they're also trying to like make a better developer kit and kind of improve the user experience. So things are still happening. Dimitri is at this other startup, but there's a team of developers you can follow on GitHub who are still trying to make Node Solid Server awesome. And they are kind of also calling for implementations, and they're making a way you can get your Solid supporting app registered in this community app registry. So this is, I think, the last slide. It's like, how do these things compare? They're mostly complementary, like I said. I think there is this interesting dissonance between like ActivityPub, activity streams, having everything contained in a JSON object, whereas a lot of Solid was using JSON or Turtle or linked data, any sort of content negotiated syntax, and over HTTP and kind of like using both at the same time. Both extensively using linked data as our did documents, and so they're all using JSON LD, which is cool, and a really good success story for interoperability standard. And yeah, even the Activity Streams 2.0 vocabulary works for both, because that's just a linked data vocabulary. And ActivityPub is different in that it came out of this, is actually a technical recommendation, whereas Solid now is kind of in this weird no man's land where it's not, it didn't finish the standards process, so who knows like what will happen to it or how maintenance will happen. And yeah, like Solid can maybe use a host org. So when we think about any sort of MyData International organization eventually getting to the point where we can make standards, maybe we can either like carry that torch forward or be inspired by some of the modular components of Solid. That's the end.